In the heart of the Old South, they called him a savior. Ezekiel Zeke Harrow, the sheriff who rebuilt Black Hollow after the war, statues in his name, streets paved with his legacy. But behind every cheer was a secret buried deep in blood and silence. This is the story they never wanted told when the South celebrated a killer as a savior. Race, history, hidden truth. Hit, subscribe, and follow the trail of truth, where heroes wear masks and graves whisper louder than history books. His name was Ezekiel Zeke Harrow, a former Confederate soldier turned town sheriff in the post-Civil War South. To some, he was a beacon of order in lawless times, a man who protected their families and rebuilt a broken town. But to others, especially the black families who whispered behind closed doors, he was something else entirely. A butcher, a monster with a badge. Zeke's past was a storm of secrets. During the war, he led covert militia raids under the cover of night, burning homes, hanging men without trial, and burying the truth. Yet somehow, history called him savior of Black Hollow. He lived in a white-columned house on the hill, clean boots on the porch, and blood-stained memories buried beneath the floorboards. Black Hollow was the kind of town where time didn't move. It just curled around old habits. The streets still bore the names of Confederate generals. The courthouse still flew a faded Southern Cross beside the Stars and Stripes, and in the center of town stood a statue taller than any building. It was Ezekiel Harrow, cast in bronze, rifle in one hand, Bible in the other, like he was God's personal deputy. To most folks, he was a hero, a man who brought peace after the war, who protected the town from bandits, who kept order when chaos wanted in. Kids grew up reciting his name in school, and every Founder's Day, people laid wreaths around his boots. But not everybody in Black Hollow lit candles in his name. Nora Clay knew that better than anyone. She stepped off the stagecoach with a suitcase in one hand and her mama's old journal in the other. Her dress was clean but plain, her eyes sharp. A reporter for the Birmingham Gazette, Nora wasn't here for tourism. She was here for truth. Zeke Harrow had died 10 years ago, but something about his legend never sat right. Too clean. Too perfect. Men who wear medals tend to hide scars, and men who are loved by everyone usually did something awful to earn it. Nora's family used to live in Black Hollow before they left in the middle of the night in 1866, leaving everything behind. She'd grown up hearing her grandmother whisper about Sheriff Harrow, the way some folks whisper about devils. Her uncle used to spit on the ground whenever his name was said. Nora didn't understand it then. She did now. The first thing she noticed about Black Hollow wasn't the statue. It was the way people stared at her. A black woman in a white town. They didn't say anything. They just watched. Some with curiosity, some with worry. A few with something colder. She checked into the old inn. Place smelled of old books and pipe smoke, and asked the innkeeper about Harrow. "You mean our founder?" the man said, eyes wide with pride. "Why, darling? This whole town owes him its soul." Nora nodded politely and lied. "I'm writing a story about Southern heroes. Thought I'd start with the best." The man beamed. "Then you came to the right damn place." That night, she walked to the town square. The moon hung low and yellow, the statue glowing faintly in the pale light. Zeke's face looked kind, noble even. But Nora stood there and whispered, "How many people did you bury to build this town?" She didn't expect an answer. The next morning, she started digging. She interviewed the mayor, an old man who'd been a boy during Harrow's reign. He told stories about how Zeke shot horse thieves, stopped raiders, and protected their way of life. He was strict, the mayor said, but fair. But then Nora found Miss Eleanor in the outskirts, an elderly black woman who lived alone in a weathered cabin. Eleanor didn't smile. "You want to know who Zeke Harrow was?" she said, staring past Nora's shoulder like she was seeing a ghost. "He ain't no savior. He's the reason my brother disappeared." Nora leaned in. "Tell me everything." And so the truth began to peel back, layer by bloody layer. That night, Nora flipped open her mama's old journal. There was a page dated August 3rd, 1865. Written in shaky pencil. "They took Uncle Josiah. Sheriff came with men. Said he was a thief, but I saw them beat him till he stopped screaming. Mama said never speak of it again." That was the first time Nora cried since arriving in Black Hollow. Outside, the wind howled. The statue stood tall. But now she didn't see a hero. She saw a mask. and she knew she was going to break it. Full text. The next morning, Nora walked with purpose. Her boots crunched against gravel as she made her way to the town archives, a dusty old brick building tucked behind the courthouse. She had to press hard just to open the creaking door. Inside, the air smelled of mildew, forgotten paper, and varnished lies. The clerk, a frail woman with sharp eyes, barely looked up. "Need help? I'm writing about Sheriff Harrow. I'd like to see newspaper records, arrest logs, anything you have from 1865 to 1870. The woman blinked. "That's a long time back." "I've got time," Nora replied. After 2 hours of digging through yellowed newspapers, she noticed something strange. Zeke's name appeared often, always as a savior, always as a hero, but never with detail. It was like reading a script with all the blood washed out. One article caught her eye. Dated November 12th, 1865, local sheriff brings justice to freedman who threatened widow. No names, no trial. Just a brief blurb and a quote from Harrow. They were warned. Order must be kept. That night, back in her room, Nora pulled out her mother's journal again. She flipped to the same date. The entry read, "Mama screamed when she heard about Mr. Rollins and his boys. Said it wasn't right. Said they only went to ask for work." Nora's stomach turned. She needed more. Not just hearsay, proof. The next day, Miss Eleanor handed her something that changed everything. An old half-burnt journal. Found it after the fire. Belonged to Pastor McKay. He tried to speak against Harrow once. Church burned the next day. Folks said it was lightning. The journal was written in broken, urgent scrawl. The final entry read, "Sheriff Harrow and 5 men took them into the woods. They never came back. I fear judgment, but if I stay quiet, I am worse than them." Nora's hands trembled as she turned the pages. And then came a name, Josiah Clay, her great-uncle, marked as apprehended. Date matched her mother's journal. She whispered, "He didn't disappear, he was murdered." That night, she walked past the courthouse again and noticed something she hadn't before, a small stone monument behind the building. Weather-worn, half buried in weeds. It had no names, just an inscription, in memory of order kept. Order. That word again. It wasn't about law. It was about silence. She kept walking, heart pounding. The statue loomed above like it was watching her. Zeke's face seemed to shift in the shadows, smiling like he knew she was onto him, and dared her to keep going. She turned and almost bumped into someone. It was the mayor. "You're digging into things that don't need digging," he said quietly. "I'm writing the truth." Truth is dangerous when it bleeds into peace. She stared him down. Peace built on murder isn't peace. It's rot in a pretty suit. His eyes hardened. "You've got your mama's fire, but fire can get a girl burned." She didn't answer. She just walked past him. That night, someone slipped an envelope under her door. No name, just a drawing, a map of Zeke Harrow's property. Behind the barn, marked with a red X, it read, "Beneath the boards. They never found them all." Nora didn't sleep. She sat by the window, staring at the bronze statue of a man everyone called a savior, and knowing damn well she was standing in a town built on his sins. The wind was thick with heat that morning, even though the sun hadn't fully risen. Nora stood at the edge of the old Harrow property, staring past the rusted iron gate. Beyond it sat the white columned house that once belonged to the town's most beloved monster. The place looked like it had aged 100 years since Zeke died. Vines crawled up the porch pillars. The windows were clouded with dirt. No one had lived there in over a decade, not since the town turned it into a museum that never opened. She followed the map left under her door. Past the collapsed barn, across brittle grass, to the back edge of the property where an old well leaned sideways and a tool shed lay in ruin. The red X on the map pointed directly to a trapdoor hidden beneath a pile of rotting boards. Nora yanked the boards away, coughing through the dust. The metal ring embedded in the wood was rusted but still intact. With a grunt, she pulled it open. The cellar reeked of mildew and something worse, something that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. Her lantern flickered as she stepped down, her heart thudding in her ears. The stairs creaked like bones under pressure. At the bottom was a small underground room. Dirt walls, wooden beams, empty whiskey bottles, old tools. At first, nothing unusual, until she saw the wall. On it were markings, carved names, dozens of them, some barely legible, some etched with shaking hands. A few had a small cross beside them. Others were just initials. Every name was black. Nora's breath caught. Her hand traced one of the names, Josiah C. She turned slowly. On a shelf sat a blood-stained cloth, stiff with age. Beside it, a wooden box. Inside, small tokens, buttons, bits of hair, teeth. Trophies. Her stomach turned. And then she found the papers. Old Confederate letters. Personal notes. One addressed to Harrow, signed by the mayor of 1866. Continue your work. If the freedmen resist, purge them. Order is everything. There it was. Proof. This wasn't a lone man's madness. It was a system. A pact. Suddenly, she heard a noise above. The trapdoor creaked. Footsteps. She doused the lantern. A long silence. Then the footsteps retreated. Someone knew she was there. When she finally climbed out, the sun was high. Sweat soaked her back, but she was colder than she'd ever been. She wrapped the documents in her coat and headed back toward town. But she didn't go to the inn. She went to the schoolhouse. Inside, the children recited a pledge to the town. A portrait of Ezekiel Harrow hung over the blackboard. The teacher smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" Nora looked at the kids. "Does anyone here learn about the Harrow trials? About what happened in 1865? The teacher blinked. "We cover the Reconstruction. Sheriff Harrow is part of the peace effort. He stopped raids, protected the town." Nora felt her throat tighten. "What about the people he killed?" The room went quiet. The teacher's smile faded. There were casualties during unstable times. Nora turned and left. Later, she sat on a bench at the edge of town, watching that same statue again. It no longer looked like a symbol of pride. It looked like a monument to forgetting, a lie carved in metal. She knew what she had to do. She pulled out her notebook, titled the first chapter, "The Savior Who Stood on Bones." The next morning, Nora's notebook was gone. She'd hidden it beneath a loose floorboard in her inn room, along with the journal and letters from the cellar. But when she pulled it up, empty, only dust. She didn't panic. She felt something worse. Confirmation. Someone had been watching, and now they knew she had the truth. Downstairs, the innkeeper avoided her eyes. At breakfast, the other guests, white families, farmers, and store clerks, spoke in hushed voices, glancing at her over mugs of coffee. One man chuckled too loud, as if to prove nothing was wrong. Another dropped his fork when she walked by. She was no longer the quiet outsider. She was the threat. Nora walked straight to the mayor's office. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You took it," she said, slamming the door behind her. He didn't deny it. "You had no right digging in graves," he said calmly. "Let the dead sleep." "They were never buried. They were erased. There's a difference." He stood up, his smile gone. "You don't understand what you're doing. This town survived because of men like Harrow. He made hard choices, but he kept this place standing." "At what cost?" she snapped. "How many families, how many men and women were lynched, beaten, and disappeared, all so you could call him a savior?" The mayor stepped around the desk slowly. "We don't need a war down here. Not again, and certainly not from someone whose blood left this town generations ago." "You can't stop the truth," she said, even as her hands shook. "Sure I can," he whispered. "I already did." That night she received a visitor. A boy, no older than 12, stood outside her window holding a torn page from her notebook. It read, "They all knew. They all let it happen." He said nothing, just pointed toward the church. Inside, Nora found a group of old men, preachers, judges, and businessmen, holding a meeting. A fire burned in the hearth. Papers were being tossed in. She listened from the shadows. She's not going to stop. If she prints it, we'll have the NAACP crawling through town. Statue comes down. Questions start rising. Families get blamed. "You want to explain to your grandkids why their name's on a death list?" One voice spoke calmly. "It's not about Harrow anymore. It's about all of us." They were cleaning up Zeke's past not out of loyalty, but survival. Their grandfathers stood beside him. Some had given orders, others had watched, but none were innocent, and Nora had made them remember. She stepped back, one creaking board beneath her foot giving her away. The conversation stopped. She ran, out of the church, through the alleys, across the square. Footsteps echoed behind her. A whistle cut through the air. She ducked into the abandoned print shop, slammed the door shut, held her breath. Silence. Then a voice outside, calm and slow. "You've got until morning, Miss Clay. Then you leave, or we bury your truth right beside the others." She waited until they were gone. Her body trembled, not from fear, but from rage. They didn't just protect Zeke Harrow, they became him. His face might be bronze, but his spirit was flesh, alive, in their hands. in their laws, in their lies. That night, she lit a match and held it above her mother's journal. The one thing they hadn't taken. She didn't burn it. She packed it, because in the morning she wasn't leaving. She was publishing. Nora sat on the porch of the abandoned print shop, the sunrise bleeding red across the rooftops. She hadn't slept. She didn't need to. The press inside was old, rusted, barely functional, but the ink still flowed, and she'd spent the whole night setting every word by hand. Every name, every quote, every date. The paper would run once. One issue. No ads, just truth. The headline screamed in thick black letters, "The Killer Who Built Black Hollow." Subhead, Ezekiel Harrow's Hidden Crimes and the Town That Helped Him Hide Them. It was printed on thick parchment, the kind people couldn't just crumble up and forget. She folded a stack, walked straight to the courthouse, and slid them under the door. Then to the mayor's house, then the school, then the church, and finally to the statue. She tacked one onto the bronze base, right under the plaque that read, "Our Savior." It fluttered in the wind like a challenge. By mid-morning, the town was humming. Doors slammed. Men barked into one another's faces. Some demanded Nora be arrested. Others read the paper twice, in silence. A few wept. Most didn't say a word. Miss Eleanor stood on her porch with a copy clutched to her chest. Her voice cracked. "You did it. After all these years, someone finally told it plain." Nora said nothing. She just nodded, holding back the tears. At noon, she was summoned to Harrow's old house. She found the mayor sitting alone on the porch, looking small. "She'll tear this town apart," he said without looking at her. "No," Nora said. "She'll finally let it grow." He handed her a folded letter. "It's from Zeke, written before he died. He gave it to me, told me to burn it. I couldn't." Inside was a confession. Zeke's handwriting was jagged, angry, and tired. "They called me a protector, but I protected only the lie. I was the sword they wanted. I just wore the robe too. I killed men who begged. I silenced families who cried. I told myself it was duty, but I knew better. They built a statue not for who I was, but for what they needed to forget." At the bottom, one final line. "If there is a God, may he never forgive me." Nora held the paper for a long time. 2 days later, the statue was gone. No ceremony, no grand speeches, just a crane in the early morning lifting the bronze killer off his pedestal while a few people watched from their windows. In its place, a plaque was installed. Simple, honest. "This ground once honored a lie. Let truth grow here instead." Nora returned to Birmingham with copies of her report already circulating in newspapers across the state. Black Hollow would never be the same. Some wanted revenge, others freedom. Most were quiet, and that was enough. As the train pulled away, she looked out the window at the trees, the earth, the sky. She didn't feel peace, but she felt purpose. Because sometimes the truth doesn't heal. It just clears the rot, and in its place, something honest can finally grow. They built a statue to remember a man, but it took one woman's voice to remind them what he truly was. In Black Hollow, justice didn't wear a robe, it wore a badge, carried a Bible, and hid behind silence. But truth always finds a voice, even if it takes generations. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share your thoughts in the comments. Like if truth-telling matters. Subscribe for more stories that don't just entertain, they reveal. Because some legends deserve to be shattered.